And on behalf of the City Council and city staff, and particularly the Water and Pollution Control staff, I would like to welcome all of you to the press conference this morning and thank you for coming to be informed about what the water circumstances are in Ames. As you know, one of the most important things that citizens expect of the city government is to have good, clean, safe water. In Ames, we're very proud of the fact that consistently our water has won both national awards for both safety and passing the taste test. But as in the state and as the nation right now, there have been a number of communities that have not been as lucky as we are. We want to be very transparent and update you as to what the water needs and circumstances are in Ames right now. So with that in mind, we have here a number of employees from the City Water Department, and we have more in the audience for those of you who may want to ask questions afterwards. So at this point, I'm pleased to turn this over to our 10-year veteran as the director of the Ames Water and Pollution Control Department, John Dunn. John?
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. The Water and Pollution Control Department has multiple operating groups, one of which is the water treatment plant. And while our customers often think of what we do as providing them a product, tap water, we actually think of what we do as providing a service, protecting public health. That's actually what we do. And the way we protect public health is by providing safe drinking water. Now, for myself and for the other colleagues from the city's Water and Pollution Control Department, I'm sure can attest, watching what's unfolded in the city of Flint, Michigan over the last several months has been difficult to watch. Their entire way of life has been disrupted, and individual health of their customers and their citizens have been impacted in ways that just cannot easily be repaired. And it's had a ripple effect that's gone through the entire drinking water industry nationwide, because now our customers have some new thing to be scared of in their drinking water, lead. And we've probably answered more questions about lead in the last 6 months from our customers here in Ames than what we've had in the balance of the 125-year history of the Ames water utility. So we're kicking off an informational campaign this morning to educate our customers about the safety of their water and to reassure them that they can trust us to take care of issues so that what happened in Flint will not reoccur here in Ames. So as we walk through the information we've got to share, I really have 4 key points that I want to stress. And here's my first key point. And that's that the quality of drinking water in Ames bears no resemblance to what's happened in Flint, Michigan. The source water as it comes out of the Ames aquifer has no lead in it. The water as it leaves the Ames water treatment plant has no lead in it. And most importantly, the chemistry of the water that we put out from the water treatment plant is carefully and intentionally controlled to limit the potential of additional lead contamination as the water moves through the distribution system, and in particular as it moves through customers' homes. So we have a very short video that we'd like to play that just explains our treatment process, and then I'm going to ask our water plant superintendent, Lyle Ames, to come and explain the role that the treatment process plays in protecting customers from lead.
22 different wells provide a very high quality and reliable water supply. The wells pump water to the treatment plant. At the plant, water goes through a number of chemical processes. The 2 main functions of the plant are to soften and disinfect the water. The softening process uses pebble lime to chemically remove water hardness. Liquid chlorine is used to disinfect the water in the plant and to maintain a chlorine residual throughout the water distribution system. Other treatment processes include aeration for iron removal, addition of carbon dioxide for pH adjustment, filtration, and finally, the addition of fluoride for dental protection. Once the treatment process is complete, water moves through a series of ground storage tanks on its way to the main pumping station. These pumps provide water throughout Ames, and they maintain levels in the 3 Ames water towers. The towers help maintain pressure in the system and provide fire protection for the city. Our water plant operators are on shift 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, completing tests every 2 hours to ensure the safety of our drinking water. This totals 176 tests per day. In addition, our state-certified laboratory completes tests to ensure we comply with the highest standards, both at our plant and at the faucet where you get your water. The City of Ames laboratory tests the tap water weekly to ensure that we continuously meet the standards, so our water is safe to drink.
Okay, good morning. 2 years ago, the city did research on water in our distribution system. Specifically, we were looking at what is called water stability. By that, I mean whether water tends to be corrosive or depositing. If it becomes corrosive, it can, over time, eat away at metals such as lead, inside the piping systems. Or if it's depositing, it forms calcium deposits on the insides of pipes. These deposits form a protective barrier between lead service lines and the water. We found our water to be what we call slightly depositing, which is what we want. Again, this prevents lead from going into the water where it could be ingested by humans. It's all about the chemistry. One of the associated issues in Flint was extremely rusty water. We've all seen rusty water in distribution systems before. There is always some accumulation of iron or rust inside piping, which is to be expected. Rusty water in itself doesn't mean you have a lead issue. However, if you do have a lead issue, a lot of times it's usually associated with bouts of extremely rusty, discolored water. In Flint, the water was very discolored in wide areas across the system. The graph behind me shows iron levels in our distribution system over the last 3 years, which is when the last time is we tested for lead. As you can see, the levels are relatively consistent and much less than the regulated secondary standard for iron. In Flint, this graph would have looked very, very different over that same time period. pH also plays a significant role in the stability of water. The second graph shows the pH of Ames water over that same 3-year period. As you can see, it's very consistent. In red, you can see the pH of Flint's water, which was being lowered significantly over a relatively short period of time. This contributed to their problem. One question I commonly get is this: how is Ames water going to change when we change treatment plants? That is a fair question, since Flint did change treatment plants. My answer is that the water shouldn't change because we intend to maintain a consistent water chemistry. Early on in the design of our treatment plant, we created some overriding goals for ourselves, and a couple of them were that we didn't want to change the taste of the water, and we didn't want to change the quality of water, and I have every reason to believe that we will achieve those. The general treatment process is going to stay the same. We'll just be using a lot newer equipment to produce the same quality product. We look forward to testing and starting up the plant in about a year from right now. So with that, I'll turn it back to John.
Thank you, Lyle. So here's the second of my 4 points, and that's that protecting consumers from lead is not something that the utility can do by itself. It requires the customers to be aware of the plumbing that they have in their own homes and recognize that if there's a potential that their own plumbing could change the quality of their water. What little risk there is from lead exposure primarily comes from the water service line, and that's what we have mocked up here in front of the podium. So what you see here, starting on your right-hand side, the blue pipe is the water main. That would typically be out in the street in front of a home or business. And you can see that there's a saddle on it with a tapping valve. That's the corporation tap, and that's the point at which the customer's plumbing system interfaces with the city's distribution system. So there's a gooseneck that comes up and back down that travels to a shutoff valve or a curb stop. This is typically found right at or near the property line, oftentimes right behind the curb or perhaps in the driveway. And then the service line continues on underground into the house, and it will come up in the lowest floor of the house. If there's a basement, that would be in the basement. It's usually in a mechanical room, and it's where the water meter sits, which you would see right here with a valve on either side of the water meter. And then it's after the meter that the plumbing would branch off and travel throughout the home to all the different fixtures. Now in Ames, there's only 2 components here that the city owns and maintains, and that's the water main in the street and the water meter. All of the rest of this infrastructure is actually owned by the customer, and it's the customer's responsibility to maintain it. Now, for a certain period of time, it was really fairly common across the entire United States for the service line components to be made out of lead. In Ames, we have approximately 19,000 of this type of a service connection serving individual properties. And over the last few weeks, we've had several employees pouring through records, some of which dating back to the late 1800s, to try to identify properties that may still have lead components in the service line. And while we are...
That's 19,000 total connections.
19,000 total connections, that is correct. And so what we found is out of that 19,000, approximately 300 still remain in Ames that have lead components somewhere in this piping configuration. So that's about roughly 1.5% of our customers. So that means that really for the vast majority of Ames customers, 98+%, the issue of lead is really not there. Now we will have, by Wednesday of next week on the city's website, an interactive map, once we finalize that list, where customers can go, they can type in their address, and it will tell them whether that property is on the list that we have of likely lead service lines. Or you can interact with the map, you can navigate in, find your neighborhood, zoom in, and see if your property is on that list. But we don't want to have to force all 19,000 of those properties to go to the website to look it up. So our intention is to next week send letters to every property address that our records indicate that they have the potential of lead service lines. So those will likely go out on May 25th. And so getting that letter will obviously spark questions in the customer's mind. And so here's my third point that I want to stress, and that's the fact that having lead components in the service line does not automatically mean that there's going to be dangerous levels of lead in the drinking water. Even in the city of Flint, the piping that was the source of the lead exposure has been in the ground for decades. It wasn't until the chemistry of the water distribution system changed that lead was able to start leaching out of the plumbing and come into the drinking water system. So to illustrate how remote that potential is here in Ames, I'm going to ask our laboratory services supervisor, Mary Ann Ryan, to come and explain the history of testing in Ames and the way we test to ensure that our water is safe for our customers.
Good morning. So when the lead and copper rule first was enacted, utilities were required to establish a sampling pool of homes. And in Ames, in the early 1990s, we conducted a material study to identify homes with either a full or partial service line or copper plumbing with lead solder put in between 1982 and 1986. From those approximately 2,700 homes at that time, a subset of 86 were selected to establish our sampling pool here. So there are a few ways relative to lead that you can create a bigger potential to find high lead levels. So first, when we selected our homes for our pool, we chose ones with the longest service lines. For example, if there was a line that had 10 feet of lead versus one with 20 feet of lead, we chose the one with 20 feet to maximize the potential. And also when sampling for lead, we instruct our customers to not use any water in their home for a minimum of 6 hours. Now, the reason we want them to do that is lead leaching into water is not a fast process. So we want that water to have time to sit next to those lead pipes and allow it to leach out if it's going to. So along with that, we also tell the customer before they collect their sample to not let their water run. Do not flush their water, but to get what's called a first flush. And for that very same reason, is we want water that's not fresh from our main, but water that has been sitting with that contact time in the pipes. So back in the 90s, we tested 60 locations for lead every 6 months. But for many years, we've been on what's called reduced monitoring. And reduced monitoring is allowed because our results have shown very low levels, below the action level of 15 parts per billion, signifying our water is not corrosive. And reduced monitoring consists of 30 samples every 3 years. So if we can have the next slide. This will show you the results from our last 4 sampling rounds. These first two, 2007 and 2004. If you look, our action level compared to the 15 parts per billion we're required to stay below was actually what you would call a non-detect. It says less than 5. All that means is our instruments can read down to 5, and it was somewhere below that. Also, you can see the very highest one of all the samples we tested, the very highest level we saw was 6 parts per billion versus the 15. And on the next slide, this is 2010 to 2013, one change you see, same sort of thing. We saw very low levels. Our max was at 6 and 4. Our non-detect level at that point, our instrumentation, we could read down to 2 parts per billion. So very similar results there. Now in 2016, we're going to be off reduced monitoring for the first time in 20 years. Now, in the lead and copper rule, there are multiple triggers that cause a system to lose the reduced monitoring. One of those would be changes in their source water. Another would be changes in their treatment. But in our case, it was simply a population trigger. We just reached that trigger and you just automatically go off reduced monitoring. So in 2016, we're going to be going back to 60 samples every 6 months, and we're going to have to add to our pool. And we'll be contacting customers in this pool of 300 plus homes and asking them to be added to our permanent sampling pool. So with that, I'll turn this back over to John for his final points. Thank you.
So in the press packet we gave you, there is a small flyer, and this is going to be sent to the customers with their letter when that goes out next week. And it's really intended to try to answer those, maybe the first 2 or 3 questions that a property owner may have, and give them some really simple tips of things they can do themselves to protect themselves from lead exposure. For example, lead, like virtually any other substance, is more readily dissolved in hot water than in cold water. And if you just think about trying to dissolve sugar in tea, you can dissolve sugar much easier in hot tea than you can in cold tea. Same philosophy holds for lead. So any water that you're going to use for consumption purposes, you should always start with the cold water. For example, if you're going to fill a pot to boil pasta, don't try to cheat the process and shortcut it by filling it with hot water. Start with the cold water. And especially if you're reconstituting baby formula, you should always start with the cold water and not filling with hot water. And also, as Mary Ann described, the way we sample to try to maximize the lead that we can detect in the water, you just want to do the opposite of those things to minimize the exposure. So where Mary Ann talked about we wanted to sample water that had been in contact with the plumbing for a long period of time, you actually want fresh water when you're consuming it. So if you have copper plumbing like we show here, that's really not a concern. But if you are one of those properties that has a lead service line, what we would suggest is that when you first get up in the morning, just open your tap all the way up and let it run until the temperature of the water turns cold. You can tell just by holding your finger in the stream as it runs from the faucet, and just let it run until you get cold water. That's the indication that you're getting fresh water from the main out in the street. And because we always tout conservation, you can capture that water. It's absolutely safe to use to water your plants. Now, we recognize that even all the information that we provide in the letter and in the brochure that goes to our customers, getting a letter that says you have a lead service line could be a scary thing to learn. And so this is my 4th and final point, and that's to offer the most reassurance we can to those customers. For any home that has a lead service line, we are going to offer to test the water in their home at no cost to them. So we will provide them with a sample kit that will include instructions on how they can sample, just like Mary Ann described, in a way that would generate the greatest likelihood of us detecting lead in the water if it's there. And then they can bring it back to us. We will analyze that in our state-certified laboratory, and then we'll provide an individualized report back to the property owner, not only with their results, but with an interpretation, because just getting a number isn't a helpful thing to know. So we'll help put some context to it when we give them the results. So to wrap up, I'd just like to mention a couple of other information sources that we're making available. We have put a wealth of information on our website, and we've created a simple URL to get there. It's cityofames.org/lead, and that'll take you to a page that has a lot of the information we've shared today. It'll have links to health websites like the Centers for Disease Control. If people are interested in lead filters, there's information there on how to get to the National Sanitation Foundation's website so that you know that you're getting a filter that's actually certified to remove lead. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be doing a series of social media posts, so customers who are interested in getting more information about lead can find us on Facebook or on Twitter. Just search for Ames Water. And we also recognize that there are some questions that you just can't find from a search that's not interactive. And so we are available at the water plant during normal business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, at 239-5150. And if anybody has questions, we'll get them paired up with someone on our staff who's got the expertise to answer the question that they have. The last thing to note, in the letter that goes to the customers, at the bottom of the letter, we talk about a couple of informational meetings that we're going to hold in July. We're going to take a Thursday evening and a Saturday morning and just have our staff available in a meeting room at the public library so that anybody who has questions, even if it's not about lead, if they have questions about their drinking water, we'll be there and we'll be ready to answer those questions for them. So with that, that's the conclusion of our prepared comments. Lyle, Mary Ann, and I are available for questions, and we are going to hang around for a while afterwards if you'd like to talk one-on-one. Roger.
John, you might have mentioned this, but the 1% is the possible problem. That's what I thought I heard you say. Of that, do you have any breakdown about residential versus commercial?
I don't off the top of my head. I would suspect that the majority of those are going to be residential, but there are certainly some commercial entities in there as well.
And if it were on a map, would it be like by every neighborhood has kind of a date to it, you know, an era? Is it date specific or is it random?
It is. There's a couple of dates that are good reference marks. One good hard reference mark is 1986, because that's the year that the plumbing code changed that outlawed the use of lead in public water systems. So that's one easy hard date. But the prevalence of lead that went in Ames happened in the 20s, 30s, 40s in that time frame. So newer homes are less likely to have lead than older homes. Yeah.
When you return to the more frequent monitoring and you have to increase the number of properties that you're monitoring, will the 30 that you had been monitoring every 3 years be among the new group that you monitor? And then secondly, what's the thinking behind a population trigger for the increased monitoring? I know it's not your decision, but someone makes that decision.
I'll step back.
So yes, the homes that were originally part of the pool are going to stay part of the pool, with the exception of ones that have been removed when we've put in mains, new mains, when they have lead service lines attached to that. This has just been something we've been doing for many years. If they have lead service lines, we are replacing those as we come across them. So that pool we originally started with has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So that's part of the reason with this increased monitoring, we're going to have to increase that pool because people have to voluntarily participate in it. And your second question was about?
Population trigger for the increased monitoring.
You know, I can't answer that question. I'm unsure why it would make any difference. Sorry.
Actually, I can address that. The population trigger, every 3 years I renew our operations permit, and the last time we did it, our population, according to our water utility, is 50,029 people. We just went over the 50,000. Now the population of Ames is greater than that, but we actually reduce it by a certain amount because the Iowa State University's distribution system is separate. So the 50,000 threshold is the number that moved us into the increased monitoring.
John, in regards to that 1.5%, you're probably going to field questions now, should I have all of the pipes in my house replaced?
There's probably two answers there. The first thing to understand is that the risk today is no different than what the risk has been for 40, 50 years, whenever that service line went in. Now, long term, I think that there's going to be a push by the drinking water industry to try to get all of those service lines replaced. And so I would encourage folks, not out of a sense of crisis, but over a period of time, to be thinking about that and planning ahead and budgeting for the replacement of a service line.
In regards to your model here, so that lead is generally from the city, their lead pipes would be generally from the street connection to the
meter.
Thank you.
Yeah, and some properties may have already undergone a partial service line replacement. It used to be common that if there was, say, a leak in this portion over here, they would replace it just back to the curb stop, but there may still be lead from the curb stop to the street. Now, today, we wouldn't allow people to do that because there's a wealth of evidence that's come to light in the last 10 years that doing partial service line replacements can, for a short period of time, actually make things much, much worse by disturbing those deposits that had built up over time inside the plumbing. So if you are going to replace your service line, you need to replace the entire service line. So, are there any other questions?
This would be, if you replace the service line, this is a private contractor, your city is not in that business, correct? You don't-
That is correct, yeah. So they would need to find a licensed plumber.
I mean, how expensive would that be? You're talking like probably thousands, right?
Yeah, the price range is obviously it's going to vary by how long your service line is and whether this water main happens to be on your side of the street or on the other side of the street. But a typical range for a residential home is going to be between $5,000 and $6,000. Yes.
When those lead service lines were common, was the plumbing inside people's houses also lead, or is there not a risk that you have lead in your pipes inside the house?
There is the potential that there is some. We don't have records in the city of what those materials of construction are. If somebody has a plumber in their home, hopefully, even if the plumber is working on a shower head or something, if they notice that there's lead fixtures in the home, they're bringing that to the homeowner's attention. Okay, so I don't see any other questions, but like I said, Lyle, Marianne, and I will hang around for a while if you have some questions for us one-on-one. I do appreciate you coming. This is an important reassurance to our customers just because of all of the attention that's been swirling around the city of Flint and the questions it's created. So we do appreciate your time this morning in helping us convey this message to our customers. Thank you.